This is Nikon's first 85 1.2 autofocus lens. The entire Nikon world have been waiting for this, and finally it's here. First things first, it is clearly a chunky lens, and there's a lot of glass elements inside it. Lots of glass. Just look at that huge front element. There's something about a big wide front element of a lens that always makes it look special and expensive. This lens has a 82 filter thread and the usual high quality Nikon special Nano Crystal coating for superior optical performance. In total, there are 15 glass elements inside this lens and in 10 groups. Why is that important? Because it tells you how much work has gone into perfecting this lens, and that's why we had to wait for such a long time, because this is a special piece right here. How this Nikon lens stands out in the entire lineup of Z mount S line lenses is that this is the only lens, apart from the 8,000 US dollars or 6.5 lakh rupee 58.95 Noct, that has 11 aperture braids. What that will allow you to do is that when you go down from f1.2 to, let's say, f4 or even 5.6, the bokeh balls will remain round throughout the aperture range. They will not take weird hexagonal shapes. The bokeh balls will not look weird and hexagonal and sort of angular in their look and shape. Now, how does this lens feel in the hand? It is a heavy lens, no doubt, but it is a lighter lens than the Canon version of the 85 1.2 by about 35 grams. It is heavier than the 50 Nikon 1.2 by about 70 grams. And at 1.16 kilos, it is a heavy lens, but it is still lighter by about 170 grams by the 70 to 200 f2.8 Nikon Z mount. For professionals and portrait shooters, the 85 is a standard formidable focal length that allows a lot of flexibility and control, because unlike at 200 you're not too far away from your subject. You can still talk and interact with your subject while shooting with a 85 lens compared to, let's say, with a 70 to 200 at the 200 With a zoom lens, you may need, if you're shooting at 200 which is where most shooters would like to shoot the 70 to 200 at most often, because that gives you that compression and depth of field and all that. If you want to shoot it like that, you may need a walkie-talkie just to interact with your subject. Now let's see how this mounts on the standard size Z bodies. So I have the Z6 II with me right now, and let's see how it mounts on the Z6 II. Okay. Honestly, this feels manageable. This can be used by holding this entire setup in one hand, whereas the 70-200, because it's a longer lens, like this is the difference, right? Because it's a longer lens, it'll sort of tip forward a bit, right? So this is a more balanced lens, and Nikon did a great job by reducing the length of this lens by a few centimeters, but every centimeters help. And the 50 is longer than this, and I think going forward the fast Nikon lenses should try to be as short as possible, so there is greater balance while holding the lens, and it doesn't tilt forward. And that's I think is the critical factor, apart from the weight. Yes, the weight matters as well. Now it is much lighter than the 70 to 200. I said almost about 200 grams. Now this is fine, because you expect to see a certain amount of heft on a 1.2 lens, especially if you want the lens to be perfected. If you want the lens to be corrected for optical performance, you will need to put in those real glass elements so that you have high quality output from the lens. Now, I think Nikon have done a fantastic job to keep the size and the weight of this lens to manageable levels. I won't say it's a very petite thing, but I think it's done within, so that it's the final shape and size and weight is within manageable levels for most people. So if you want to have an on-location portrait shoot for about an hour and a half, I think this is quite manageable. But how does it look on the smaller bodies? I have the Z30 right now with me. Let me try it on the smaller Z30. Now, honestly, the Z30 almost has no weight. It feels like I'm only holding the lens. But the surprising thing is that even something as tiny as the Z30, actually feels good to hold it, because it's got a real grip. Like, how many cameras within the price, this Z30 price packet actually has a grip? I mean, this Z30 has a grip. I can think of shooting, taking some pictures with the 85 1.2 on the Z30. It's possible because of its sort of ergonomics and built-in design, despite this being such a small camera. Overall, the lens does not feel, when you hold it, when you see it, when you just touch it, it feels very premium made. It doesn't feel cheap at all. Through and through, it's a much better built 1.2 than its competition from other brands, and it's got a very solid feel to it. Now, what about the overall build quality? The lens comes with important features like autofocus, manual focus switch here on the side, for example. Then you have, along with that, you have a lens function button. You have just one lens function button here, and you have a control ring. Now, I don't use the control ring much. You can customize this control ring to do anything. You can change ISO with it or change aperture with it. It depends on how you set it up and how you use it and your use case and the way you find it comfortable to hold the camera and use the stuff. Usually, I set the lens ring to no function because I often end up touching it unintentionally and then changing my settings. I don't want to do that. But the fact that we have this feature on this lens is a great benefit. Good that you at least have this lens, so when you want it, you can use it. Now, the manual focus on this lens is actually quite smooth. It feels smooth to rotate. It's not loose. It does not feel loose. It just feels smooth. And like I said, overall the build quality, it feels it's got a decent amount of metal to the lens, so I think the metal to composite percentage is sort of good, where you have decent amount of metal as part of this the build quality of this lens. Now, I want to leave you with some observations about this lens. This lens has almost no focus breathing, very well controlled focus breathing, which means that this is amazing for filmmakers and for video makers out there. Second, this lens is fantastic in low light, not only because it's got a bright 1.2 aperture, not only because of that. What do you all have in the evenings in the low light situations? You have lots of artificial lights, bulbs, LEDs, and all that. So you mostly have point sources of light. When those point sources of lights are in picture, you have something called chroma smearing. You basically start seeing those point sources of light showing some flares and some sort of imperfections. They look smudgy. They don't look sharp. But this lens is truly built for the night, because in night conditions, when you have so many point sources of light, it handles those sources so well. Nikon didn't just make this lens a 1.2 and called it a day. They have actually ensured that this is specially built for the night shooting situations, and it takes care of the lighting conditions available during those night shooting situations anywhere in the world. And just for this alone, I can call this a Noct or a nocturnal lens, because it's truly built for it's not, like I said, it's not enough to make it a fast lens. You have to ensure that it is usable at 1.2. Now, one last point which everyone talks about when it comes to fast lenses is that the bokeh. The bokeh from this lens is phenomenal. Even when you just step back and take a wide view, okay, when you maintain a certain amount of distance from between the camera and the subject, you take a wide view, there is just so much bokeh in the background that it's crazy. It gives you that feel, it gives you that medium format look, wide look with shallow depth of field. I bought this lens without a moment's thinking for that one single reason, to get that medium format look. There's just one last thing that I would include in my impressions. This is a lens that has this uncanny, strange, which is related to bokeh, uncanny, strange, yet beautiful floating three-dimensional rendering to it that makes you feel that you can almost step into the image and walk around in that world. It gives you a sense of depth, distance, and a sense of realism that makes things look better than they look even in the real world. This Nikon is special. This is one in a decade lens. It'll make many fans around the world and many fan groups. And I'm going to be surely there among them. What about you? I'm going to see you soon with another one.